March EPSG meeting. Hope you guys are having a great week. Looking forward to a great weekend. But we do have an action-packed agenda for you all. Seeking some very meaningful feedback that staff is going to be working on to inform the upcoming SBEC meeting. So we'll go ahead and get started. Jess, if you can go ahead and move us through some of our housekeeping. Not only is this meeting being recorded and will be posted on the website, Judith is always very sweet to also send you all the link to that recording so you can have it for your own purpose, as well as to share it for your representatives. Please mute your microphone unless you are speaking, and if you can please leave your camera on, and then to make sure that you rename yourself in Zoom with your name and organization, so we always have a strong record of which one of our great stakeholders is saying what in what area. So as you will see, I was not joking when I sent you the email and said we have all of these topic areas. Staff is going to walk you through very meaningful discussions. We're going to talk about 228, the EPF, the Great Teacher Residency discussion, Reading Academies, which was addressed at your January meeting. This will also be the next steps on that. The bilingual SPED educator standards update, as well as TPA updates. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to the great Laura Moriarty, and no one look at her blank wall because you'll get sad as we are. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura and let y'all get to work. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. But Christy alluded to the fact that today is my last day at TEA. I have resigned and I'm going to go work as the general counsel for the Department of Motor Vehicles. But that doesn't mean that the work on 228 is going to stop. After I'm gone, the main contact for this will be Marilyn Cook. I have her email address and I will put it on the screen toward the end of this presentation. She's excited to do this, I know. But my hope is that the legacy of getting this 228 rewrite done will continue without me and get done, because it will be really nice when it's finished. So I'm going to walk through basically most of the same slides I showed the board at the last board meeting, but this time I'm seeking y'all's input on these, and I want you to interrupt if you have, thoughts or questions, or feel like it needs to be different on any of these topics that we're going to walk through. So the goals for this 228 redesign, first and foremost, are to make the thing readable, because as all of us who have to work in it know, 228.35 is the most difficult to navigate, whatever it is, 6-screen rule that we have, and there's just no reason for it. You should be able to look at the rules, figure out by title where you need to be, and go there easily. So this is designed to overhaul the structure of the thing, put in, sub-chapters, and make it more usable. So the other things we're doing are implementing legislation, and we're also clarifying things that have either been enforcement challenges for us or have caused confusion. So that's all the goals. So now I'm going to walk through more specific areas. Next slide, please. So as you saw at the meeting, one of the hottest topics was intensive pre-service, because staff is recommending that perhaps we should repeal it, or at least that was staff's initial recommendation, because our understanding is that there haven't been any candidates or programs that have actually used it. I sent over in the pre-work a list of the difference between what's in intensive pre-service and what's required for a regular intern certificate. And I mean, intensive pre-service requires that you take the extra the content certification exam. It lets you out of the content pedagogy exam, but you still have to take another exam, and it requires extra instructional time and more face-to-face coaching observation times before you get into the classroom. Now, the question the board raised at the meeting was, if we're hearing a lot of stakeholder input that we should increase the minimum requirements for intern certificates, should we turn what is now intensive pre-service into the requirements for all intern certificates? So my questions for y'all today is, how do you feel about those two things? Is there anyone that's still using or has used intensive pre-service or plans to use it in the future? And then the second question is, what do you think about making it into the minimum requirements of the intern certificate? Feel free to jump in if you have any thoughts. Great. Well, okay. We will be sending around. Zach just came off mute.
Yeah, Laura, I would just go on record to say I would not be in favor of having the pre-service as a minimum requirement for intern certificate.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
We will be sending, I will mention this at the end too, but we will be sending around a written survey after this. So you will have an opportunity to give us your written thoughts on all these issues, and hopefully to give us rule text too, if there's something you want to see changed in some specific way. Okay. So,
Laura, before
Yes.
you move on, it's Holly. So had some conversations with some folks about this, and I think there's, this is second and third hand information, but I think there's interest in potentially reworking the intensive pre-service so that it would be workable in an alternative certification pathway. And so I hope the choices that are being presented aren't just require it as is. If there's room for more discussion about possibly reworking it so that it's workable for a lot of different pathways, that would be appreciated.
Sure. Yeah. Do you have any specifics on that, Holly? Like what kind of reworking is being envisioned?
Well, that's a good, like I said, this is second and third hand. So
Okay.
I think it kind of goes to the questions that I guess I asked to be addressed on the agenda, which I guess we're going to do at the end. But this is one of the reasons I wondered about, given the extent to which some of these, reworking, the extent to which some of the provisions are changing, whether it might be prudent to have an actual official stakeholder group to vet some of these things. And this is certainly an area where I would say that would probably be needed.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, our intention is that this is only the beginning of the stakeholder process, and that once we get a sense of what the sort of exciting issues are, that we will break into more focused stakeholder efforts to make sure that we hone those down. The problem right now is it's so big that we need to find out what's causing people heartburn before we try to tackle the entire thing. But thank you, Holly. That's good to know.
Laura, that was one of the bigger issues that the TACO members brought up.
Okay.
Was the opportunity to participate, whether it's through Zoom or whatever, in some of the changes, and how we're affected, rather than just something put out there and then we have to deal with it.
Okay. So your feedback is just that you would like more outreach to the TACO folks, or is there something more specific than that?
To all of the people who are stakeholders, rather than just the, I guess, initial changes in 228, but maybe I guess I don't even know how to say what to combine what everybody is suggested, but some of the things that are in 228, the changes that have been made, affect us drastically as far as the changes that we're going to have to make. So I think everybody wants some input.
Sure, absolutely. Well, this is the beginning of that process. So I'm going to walk through all those changes. When you hear one that is causing concern, let me know. Come off mute and let me know so that we can make sure that we understand that and that we hone in on it in our future stakeholder engagement. Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
we have a list. So
No, great. Well, terrific. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide just in the interest of time to keep us moving. What the first thing we're doing here is implementing stuff from the last legislative session. I think by the time we get to the July proposal for this thing, again, it's going to a second discussion in April. So there will be more time to get input between now, not just now in April, but also April and July when it goes to proposal. But by the time we get to proposal in July, I think you will see us bringing in stuff from this legislative session as well, though I can't predict what that'll be. But in these provisions here, you see us implementing things that happened last legislative session. I don't believe any of this is controversial, but I'll pause for a moment to see if anybody wants to tell me otherwise. Okay, great. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we get to the definitions. And the first one up here, authentic school setting, as y'all saw, caused the board some confusion and concern. So I wanted to get y'all's input on this. We haven't previously had a definition for this. And now we're adding one for clarity for everyone. And I want to make sure well, I want to hear what you think about it and see what you would like it, how you would like it to change if it needs to change.
This is Christina Sinclair at SFA, and I would advocate that, or I guess I need to understand why professional development would not be included.
Well, so let me go back and remind everybody what the authentic school setting is for. It's just for those field-based experiences, the 15 hours that happen prior to you getting an intern certificate. So the goal of these, and the reason staff has didn't used to include summer school, for example, is because we want them to be as serious, student-focused, in-class, in-person activities as they can possibly be, with as few adult, considerations involved in it. Very, very focused on an actual student engagement and what it's going to be like in real life when you get into that classroom. So that's the reason that we do not believe professional development should be counted, because again, it's just 15 hours and we believe that they need to be very classroom student focused hours.
Thank you.
There's the lady from Texas AFT. I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but you have your hand up.
Hi, sorry, everybody. It's Kelsey. I should change my my Zoom. Just one question on that. I believe in the definition that I saw in the document that you sent around last Monday, and thank you for that particular one that highlighted all the new text. That's extremely helpful. One of the things that I saw in that definition that I wanted to ask about was the standard academic year. We have many districts who are moving to, all kinds of calendars, be it, an extended school year, an all-round school year, to, accommodate the needs of their community. So what does a standard academic year mean in this context?
Well, so it's being defined as September 1st through August 31st, and that is used. Lori may be able to answer that question faster than me with my find, but it's used to define when certain obligations for educator preparation programs happen, I believe. So you're right that there are programs that are like year-round and are no longer adhering to the specific calendar year, but it's the way that we have used it. It's what we have looked to before. My navigation is not working. Lori, can you get more specific than I can on what we're using academic year for?
No, I think you captured it in your initial comment. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. That clarifies.
Anybody else want to talk about any of these?
Hey, Laura, this is Donna from Texas Tech. Just a couple of things. We have a music program, so I was thinking specifically about marching band. There's also lots of observation during competition, things like that. Would that be excluded here? So wondering about that.
So, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. And I think it would be good. This was a lot of discussion with the EPPs. If this definition specifically clarified it was for field-based experience, because we were all confused about, are you talking about clinical or field-based? Because there's nothing here that specifies that other than what's on your slide.
Right, I believe the only place authentic school setting is used is in field-based experience, is that right? I believe that that's the
Yes,
only
I think
place
so.
in the rules that it's used.
Yeah.
So
To
again,
wait,
these definitions, like they don't do anything on their own, right? They only work when they're been inlaid into the actual rule text later on. And I believe that the only place authentic school settings shows up, and I can search it real fast, is in field-based experiences. Yeah, you're right. It's clinical teaching and practicum experiences too under the amended rules.
Yeah.
But again,
So
we can look at that harder if we feel like it. You would advocate that for the people who are doing marching band and want to do the after school activities, the UIL competitions, all that sort of stuff, that we should loosen this up for clinical teaching.
Not necessarily, but I do know it's difficult for our students who are participating in the music program if they're looking at band director, choir director, because often they spend so much of their time preparing for an in competition that I'm afraid it might limit them a little bit.
Okay.
I will say that the same thing has come up in our program. We have a very large music program, and I get questions about that in trying to use hours correctly. And it is so much of what their job is during those after school activity hours. One thing that to me changes the game here, when I hear you say that this does include this definition of authentic school setting does apply to clinical teaching. And so now we're saying professional development doesn't count during clinical teaching. I don't know if that's anybody else has that thought, but that's very much part of a teacher's a day. And it's actually a culture we've been trying to advocate for, of that professional development is learning, and that's part of what you do.
Okay, so if we split it between, if we take it out of counting for clinical teaching, then you would be okay with this kind of definition. But if it's, because it's just those 15 hours, but if it's going to count for clinical teaching as well, it needs to have professional development in there.
That's just my 2 cents on that.
No, that's fine. That's what I'm here to get. Okay. I'm going to move on unless there's anybody else who wants to weigh in on this one. Okay. Who's running the deck this morning? Is it whoever the magic fairy is? Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to walk through these. These are I've clumped these things we're changing into sort of types just to make them more approachable, I guess. The first thing we're doing is saying that new entities seeking initial certification cannot apply to offer more than 5 certificate classes. This is something that Lori and her team already try to encourage programs to do, but this would make it an official rule. The next provision changes how we deal with programs that are new. We currently have a post-approval visit within the first year, but that has turned out to be a little early because programs don't completely have their program fully fleshed out until they've gotten all the way through their first class and have completers. So this would delay that post-approval site visit until there are completers. The next provision, currently when programs close, they have to close on August 31st. And this new provision would give more flexibility there. It would allow them to close whenever they want to close, as long as they give us at least 90 days worth of notice and no more than 270 days worth of notice. So we've had a lot of problems with programs that want to close at some point earlier in the year and end up having to remain in a sort of zombie state until August 31st. The next provision asks a closing EPP to notify inactive candidates and completers who have been in the program in the last 5 years. This is trying to get at people who are outside the program but are still sort of reliant on it. We want to make sure that they're hearing about it too, in case they have unfinished business that they need to take care of before that program closes. The next provision would allow would require a closing program to give a list of other EPPs. Initially at the board meeting, you may have seen us present language that said that we wanted them to partner with a specific other EPP. We got feedback from the board that they didn't think that was appropriate. So we're going with a list of other EPPs that would be available to provide test approval and certification recommendations or transfer opportunities after the closing EPP is gone. And then the last provision in here is that a consolidation between two educator preparation programs will trigger a continuing approval review of the surviving entity. Currently, we have a lot of programs that are consolidating to get out of disciplinary actions, or when they are not having trouble, even before they are trying to get out of a disciplinary action, when they're just having trouble surviving. So we want to make sure that the program that results from that combination is still healthy and doing well. Okay, so for these 6 things, do y'all have any feedback or concerns? Great. Okay. So glad to hear. But I guess we can go to the next slide. Okay, so our next chunk of stuff is the interface between educator preparation programs and TEA. Our first one is a clunky thing that we have on the books that says EPPs can't change names. That's intended to prevent an EPP from, changing hats and avoiding its record in that way. But for colleges and universities, when they change the name of their whole university, their whole system, it has become very frustrating to have their EPP still functioning, still used for accreditation purposes under the old name. And that's not helping. That's not clarifying anything for consumers, which was the intent of the original rule. So this would allow college and university-based EPPs to change names when their whole entity is changing names. The next provision is another effort to try to clarify names without increasing hat switching again. But we have a lot of programs that use multiple DBAs. They have a name for accreditation purposes, but then they are called several things out in the field, or they change what they're called out in the field without worrying about what their accreditation name is. So this would require programs to disclose their DBA names. Again, it's not going to change what we call them for accreditation purposes or for our records, but it would be public consumer information that we could list with their profile and let consumers understand and cross-reference those other DBA names. The next provision would require EPPs to request exceptions to clinical teaching by September 1st, and then have the SBEC review reports from the EPPs who've gotten exceptions to decide whether those should be renewed. Right now, staff is supposed to review those reports and do something with them, and that system really isn't functioning very well. So we're going to try to make it more official by bringing the SBEC into it, so it's an item that has to come in front of the board, and so that those decisions get made more timely and more efficiently. And then the final thing is requiring TEA staff to tell an EPP who's under investigation that the investigation is over because they have complied and everyone is happy now. It seems intuitive, but we have not been sending, good on you letters, and this would cause us to make sure that we're doing that. So any questions about these 4 changes?
Yeah, can I have a question? Can you give me an example of exception requests for clinical teaching? Like, what might that look like?
So this is when, Lori, help me out here, but this is when a alternative certification program wants to do clinical teaching. Is that right?
No, this is the rule that allows a program who wants to do clinical teaching a different way than the SBEC has outlined is required, and one or more aspects of that clinical teaching model might not meet the minimum requirements in the SBEC. And so that program may apply to get SBEC approval to deviate from the clinical teaching requirements that the SBEC has in place if they can demonstrate through data that candidates can be successful and well-trained in that process. That process is existing right now in 228. We have about 3 programs in the state that have clinical teaching exceptions. And this would clarify the fact that the programs are supposed to come back annually and report to the SBEC that they're still having success using this exception. And this would allow the SBEC to review that each year and decide whether they want to renew that exception or not for that program.
Right. Thank you for reminding me, Lori. I'm sorry, I get
Thank
these
you.
provisions confused.
Yep.
Yeah, this, as Lori just said, this already exists. The only thing we're changing is that SBEC would do the approving rather than TEA staff in order to ensure that it actually happens.
So it would be an item on the agenda.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thanks.
It's to create consistency because we have not been terribly consistent in how we have processed the reports from programs that are already have these exceptions.
Laura, one of the questions that Taco had was, can you give us an example of some of the exceptions that have been approved?
Hit it, Lori.
Yeah. Well, two, I know right off the top of my head. One is UTeach, which is a clinical teaching process that's hosted by the UTs, some of the UT system schools. UT Austin, I think, was the initial one that was approved for that. They have restructured their clinical teaching process, but have been able to demonstrate to the SBEC that they can produce well-trained educators through that process. And I believe one of the U of H programs has a clinical teaching exception, but because I don't work closely with those programs, I'm not sure which one it is, so I don't want to misspeak. But those are two examples, and the other one I don't know off the top of my head. Does that help?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
I can give a response. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or concerns on this part? Okay, next slide, please. So our next type of tranche of changes is for issues with candidates. Our first one would require EPPs to ensure that candidates who are in the classroom on a internship have an active intern or probationary certificate. This is to make sure that an educator preparation program understands that it's their job to make sure that that certificate has gone through and that the person is valid by the time that they get into the classroom. We've had some programs that have said that this wasn't their job, so we're trying to clarify that. EPPs, the next one would require EPPs to dismiss inactive candidates after no more than 5 years. We had this rule change at the board, and the board recommended that we make it. We had said for college and university programs, whenever they withdrew from the college or university, generally they would be considered no longer inactive for the program. But now the recommendation was that we say when they have to reapply for admission, so that if you're out on some sort of leave, some sort of sabbatical to do something, you and wouldn't have to reapply for admission to come back, then you would not be considered inactive and wouldn't have to get dismissed. But if you are totally out of the school and would have to reapply for admission to come back, that would be the that point at which you're considered inactive. The next one says that EPPs can only provide test approval in a certificate category for which the candidate could meet admission requirements. This is to address EPPs that admit someone in one category for which that person has sufficient college hours and GPA, meets all the requirements, and then immediately switches that person to another certificate category for which they could not have met the admission requirements. Some programs don't even make it completely clear to candidates what topic area they're being admitted in initially, and whether or not they would have been qualified for that in the first place. So in order to ensure that everyone who takes a test eventually could have been admitted and is qualified with the required GPA hours or test scores, this would tighten that up. You can still go for a new certificate category, allow test approval, but it has to be something that they could have qualified for initially. The next topic would ask EPPs to deactivate intern or probationary certificates when late hires have not completed their coursework or training within 90 days. This is intended to tighten up the 90-day requirement because many folks are being allowed to continue in the classroom long past 90 days without their coursework and training finished. So this is ensuring that that deadline gets met and the EPBs have an incentive to make sure that it gets met. The next one is an issue that actually just arose since the board meeting. We have abbreviated internships and clinical teaching for maternity leave right now, but since FMLA and other parts of the world have started recognizing paternity leave too, we're calling it parental leave now so that everybody can have it. Does anybody have questions or thoughts about those 5?
I've got questions on the top 3 bullet points.
Okay.
For 0.65, is it possible for a technology feature to be put in place that once an intern certificate has posted, that the educator and the program are notified? That would just be helpful, that then we get pinged that it has posted as opposed to checking on a regular basis. So that'd just be a request.
Okay. Lori, do you know?
Yeah, I believe right now, the candidate, when the candidate applies for certificates, there are like 4 different touch points where an email goes out to them, an auto-generated email. And one of them is, congratulations, your certificate's issued.
Okay.
I don't know if that goes to the EPP. I do know there's a feature where the EPP can opt into receiving copies of notifications that are sent to candidates. And I know when you recommend, if your certification officer has opted into receiving those notifications, you'll receive a copy.
Okay.
For the larger programs, that's a bit overwhelming, but I don't know if you actually get the notification that says they're certified. What I do know is that in your recommendation list, in your standard recommendation queue in the green screen, you can actually sort it by certified, and you can get a complete list of everyone who's been issued a certificate.
Okay. Yep. That's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
On 31B, is this also essentially removing them out of ASAP as well?
Yes. So this would be your enrollment record. If they are inactive for a certain period of time, you would consider them no longer enrolled. You would remove them and they would need to reapply.
Perfect. And then on F, I just want to make sure language is clear. You know, Laura, you had stated for initial admittance.
Mm-hmm.
If someone goes and takes additional collegiate hours, while when they applied, they might not initially, say someone has 12 hours of math, they go take an additional 3 to get the 15. Is there an opportunity that while still enrolled, if they were to take additional classes, if they were to take, let's say, the Texas Pact, where when they would meet admission requirements, though it wasn't at the time they were admitted, that additional test approval could be provided?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I misspoke. It is at the time that you are switching them. So
great.
They just have to meet the admission requirements at the time you switch.
At the time.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you.
That's what the rule text says currently. I just misspoke.
Yep. Thank you.
Anybody else? Questions, concerns on any of these?
I just have a follow-up on F as well. Is that only applying to content certificates or also to supplemental certificates like bilingual special ed, ESL?
It says requested certificate category. Lori, how's that going to play out?
So right now, when you admit a candidate, mostly programs calculate their admission hours based on the base certificate they're pursuing. Sometimes programs report that candidates have bilingual hours, for example. If they do, most of the time they say they have 0, just because a lot of candidates don't come in with that training. So this, just based on what I'm used to seeing, I would think this is the certificate category, like the base certificate, the content hours for the base certificate. I mean, we would have to look at this more closely, I think, but just right off the top of my head, that's what I'm used to seeing when I look at y'all's admission records, not yours directly, Texas Tech, but everyone's when I see them.
Now I see how you are, Lori. Looking at
Stock in Texas Tech.
Yeah, well, let's look at how categories define. We'll go back and stare at this harder, how categories define and what it would mean for those supplementals.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. Anything else on these? Okay, then let's move on. So actually that is the end of the changes that we're going to go through. So like I said, this is only the beginning. I will be sending out a survey shortly, hopefully today, that will ask for written feedback. And if you have alternate rule text, for example, that you'd like to see show up here, please submit that. Ideas are great, but alternate rule text is even better. And then we will be seeking feedback from stakeholders that are not part of EPSG or are, sort of tangential parts of EPSG. We're going to try to cast a wide net here before the April meeting. If you or someone you know has feedback that they want to give us and it doesn't somehow fit within the survey or you think of it later, please feel free to email Marilyn anytime. Then that her email address is there on the screen so that we can make sure that we get all the ideas heading into April. And then after the April meeting, once we get more feedback on the rule text that goes to that, we will be asking more targeted questions to targeted groups to make sure we understand how it's going to impact everybody. And frankly, to get all the interested sides to debate each other and see if there's any kind of consensus we can come to if there turn out to be issues like that. So that's the plan. And I think that's all I have for today. Does anybody have any other questions?
I do have one more question. I'm sorry. So this is one that you didn't bring up, but in the highlighted copy of 228 that we received under 228.39, there's a number 11 that's added under B, and it says proactive instructional planning techniques and inclusive practices for all students, including students with disabilities. And I just wonder, how do we document that without violating student FERPA? So what would TEA be looking for in a compliance review that we've met instructional planning with students with disabilities?
So that is a provision to implement one of the statutes that we talked about very briefly earlier. Lori, can you touch on what you would be looking for there? Or
so just right off the top of my head, this is training that you're providing to your candidates. And we look for evidence of that training in your syllabi and maybe performance assessments that you're giving your candidates to assess their proficiency in those areas that you provided that training in. So those are the kind of things just right off the top of my head I would look for in a review. But if you want to have more conversation about that, I'm happy to sort of jump into that more deeply with you later on if you want to. Just let me know. But right off the top of my head, that's what I would say.
Donna, just to clarify that, so it's focused on teaching candidates about how to engage in those practices with students rather than the program engaging in those practices with candidates.
Thank you. Then that was my question. Like, are you just looking at our curriculum? Are you looking at how our candidates apply that? So, okay, I got it. Thank you.
we'll be happy to look at that and see if we can clarify it some just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, anybody else? I thought I heard somebody else.
I'd like to ask one question, and it could be that I could be off that 228 is the place for this. This is more of a question. One of the things that we are coming across quite a bit is clinical teaching is measured in days or EPPs, and then our school districts are measuring it in hours. And out here in Deep East Texas, the number of school districts that are switching to a 4-day week is rapid, and it's getting to where we have to tell them we can't give them a clinical teacher because we can't get enough days.
Yeah. Okay. You're absolutely right. That is an issue that we had discussed, and I feel like we do probably need to come up with an equivalency before the April meeting. So yeah, I think you'll see us present rule text on that. Thank you for bringing it up and reminding me that we need to deal with that.
Thanks.
And Christina, we get to the bones of some of that in the residency draft language too. So we've got some of that we can start to kind of think about how we pull it over.
Yeah, and that's an important reminder, Jessica, you just mentioned. So this 228 language we're looking at right now is the stuff that exists and the stuff we want to change. When 228 comes in July, if the board has decided that they want to do residencies and if they want to do the effective preparation framework, we will see the implementation of those come into 228 as well. At the next board meeting, you'll see them split out into 3 separate items that give you 228 language in 3 separate places, just so you can see what the existing language is that's just us trying to shore up the existing structure, and then what implementing these 2 new concepts would do to 228 as well. So while those will be separate in April, by July, they will be consolidated into one 228 proposal item. I just wanted to make sure that was clear as you go through all these different things that are going to impact 228 today. Okay, well, thanks, y'all. It's been a pleasure. Let me know if you need anything in the next, 4 hours or so. But after that, call Marilyn.
All right. Hey, all. It is me with the effective preparation framework updates. First and foremost, I am at a conference and the lighting is not working with me, so I apologize for being a talking shadow, but I promise you I am here. I just wanted to give you a couple of quick updates on the EPP development and next steps. We have our wonderful EPSG working group that is happening March 9th, so that is this coming week. We're going to continue to work on that refinement of the EPF draft content. If you'll remember from our last meeting, we did receive survey results on that initial draft language that was sent out for the EPF. And so we're going to continue to work with our EPSG working group on the input of the new lever 1, which is the EPP leadership and planning, and then some potential rebucketing of those levers, again, based on that feedback that we received, and building better alignment with the EDF and the ESF as well. The second part to that is to be able to look at identifying a few key components for that potential 228 updates as well, being able to discuss and really collaborate and then identify any key components within the draft that may necessitate like recalibrating any of the foundations that are in 228. We're not looking at making any major changes, not trying to shake anything up, but looking for where alignment is already present and then maybe making a few adjustments from there. And then the other part that I wanted to make you aware of is that we have recently launched a 2022-2023 Texas Educator Preparation Quality Program Review. And we are currently working with 5 different EPPs and with TPI US as our technical assistance provider to complete a comprehensive quality review of these programs. This was an opportunity for EPPs to apply as they walk through this more qualitative process. Which will take place March through April. So we are knee deep into the work now. And TEA is riding alongside TPI US as they are completing these reviews. Then in June and August, the EPPs that are participating are going to have the opportunity to meet with us in a focus group setting to again be able to provide that input on the quality of review. I like to say the good, the bad, the ugly, some suggestions, and really talk through what the review was like for these institutions. It's hopefully to receive input from the quality review pilot, really broader focus groups with the EPPs that have engaged in these processes. And then we'll be able to take this information and share it up with the SBAC as well with you all to inform future considerations regarding those continuing approval review processes. And the last thing that I wanted to note on this is that we have multiple types of EPPs that are participating. So this is not like a one size fits all, but we really get to dig deep into our alt certs, into our more traditional programs, as well as having a community college that's present as well.
Thanks, Ebony. So we thought it was a good opportunity to pause and step back and share a little bit of the roadmap on where we plan to go from here with the EPF draft development and some upcoming timelines. So we're, again, echo Ebony, really excited to dig in with the working group to review some of the updated and refined EPF draft language based upon feedback we received from the field, and talk about that potential opportunities for 228 integration. And we're going to ask the EPSG working group, and we'll send this information out to the broader EPSG as well, for additional follow-up feedback on any refinements to lever language as we move forward.
And then at the April SBEC meeting, plan to share an updated draft of the EPF with the SBEC for their review and input. We'll also, as Laura indicated, based upon the input of the working group, if we identify any prioritized components of the EPF to integrate within 228, we'll have that draft language for the SBEC to review and give feedback on as well. And then we'll begin to discuss or continue discussions with the SBEC related to next steps for EPF implementation. So start to have some of those early discussions really grounded in this discussion around the quality review pilot, around considerations around leveraging the EPF for continuing approval review refinement. We do plan to come back to the EPSG working group in May to discuss any of the SBEC's feedback and make refinements to the draft. And then at our broader May EPSG working group, plan to have additional opportunities for feedback on that draft before, and then circle back to the EPSG working group again in June. And then finally at the July SBEC meeting, it is our goal to present a final EPF for SBEC action. So we anticipate the SBEC to take action to signal that this is their final framework. That would be the intention. And then be an opportunity to seek direction from the SBEC on next steps for EPF implementation, i.e. considerations regarding redesign of the continuing approval review processes. That's it that in terms of updates we had on the EPF, but did want to pause to see if there were any questions that folks wanted to raise. All right. Well, with that, I know we're on a short timeline and we got a lot of good content to dig into. Do want to turn to the next focus area, which is our teacher residency definitions. I'm going to pass it over to Beth.
Morning, everyone. So I'm going to provide you with some updates on the ongoing discussion about teacher residency, as well as give you all a chance to provide some feedback on these essential components. Back in February, the SBEC discussed the components of a high-quality residency pathway and requested that we seek additional stakeholder input. This past week, we held several stakeholder forums with EPPs who are already offering a residency. And this is a summary of their feedback so far. You can see that we looked at coursework and instructional setting, supervision and coaching, and evaluation of readiness and continuous improvement support for residents. So far, what we've heard from stakeholders is they would like some more clarification on when the coursework is to occur during a residency. So is it before the residency? Is it during? Is there flexibility in there? Considerations about the instructional setting, including potential for having more than one placement throughout the year with certain circumstances. Reconsidering some of the requirements for partner teachers and the field-based experiences. For supervision and coaching, we were asked to consider the number of informal observations as well as the number of meetings between the campus leader and the field supervisor, being sensitive to people's schedules. And then also consider the requirements for who is a field supervisor. And then finally, on the evaluation of readiness and the continuous improvement, we were asked for some more specificity and possibly some standardization of the competencies and the performance gates for when we know a candidate is ready to move to the next stage of their residency and complete it. And also more considerations for when the content pedagogy exam is going to be required. So this is the feedback we have so far. Since we have all of you together today, we would also love the opportunity to get your input on these competencies or on these components. So on the next slide, we'll go through a little protocol here so we can hear back from you. We're going to review those three larger sections one by one. And if you could think about these questions as you're looking at these components, do they sufficiently define a high quality residency? What about this works? What do you think needs to be adjusted to make it work? And what are we missing? We may have overlooked something, so please let us know. you could come off. It would be wonderful also to have this as a record in the chat so I can go back and compile your feedback and send it out. So any comments you have, please also put them in the chat so we make sure that they're recorded.
I'll also take some notes in the background too, Beth.
Oh, thank you. I'm
Absolutely.
terrible at typing and doing anything else at the same time, so I appreciate
I've got
that.
it.
All right, so we're going to start with the first section. We'll probably take about 5 minutes for you to review these. I know you've seen them before and provide your feedback. So we're looking at coursework and instructional setting.
As folks are finishing, wrapping up, reviewing the section again, their feedback together, Susan, and just address your question in the chat. If the residency certificate is approved, when will candidates be able to use it? That's a great question. I think there's been some confusion as to whether what we're calling the residency certificate would be something that we would issue to a candidate while they were completing their residency, or if it would be something that they would earn upon completion of their residency, akin to a standard certificate. The intent of what we've outlined so far would be that this would be a certificate that they would earn upon completion of their residency. The intent here would be to signal that these candidates had gone through a high quality residency model and had earned this certificate. So really wanting to make explicit and clear for hiring managers and to denote for candidates those who had gone through a residency pathway. Where any input folks have, I'm going to call it branding for lack of a better word, but on a name for what we would want this certificate to be called at the end to make it compelling. We've thought around kind of like teacher's certificate, residency completer, or something along those lines that signals that this is a candidate who had completed a residency. Christina, thoughts on your end?
I just had a question around where for the instructional setting, teacher remains on the same campus for the full residency. I would wonder if it could be a little more like within the same district, because things happen so often that a campus change might be unavoidable. And so just wondering what would that consequence be if they had to change a campus, but they stayed, like they're still in Dallas, but just different campus.
Yeah, I could jump in here on that. Christina, that's a concern that at least both in Texas and nationally, I myself have heard a lot. There's a lot of really powerful research around predicting the effectiveness of a teacher candidate based on the effectiveness of their mentor teacher. In fact, it's the most correlative data that we have in teacher prep around future effectiveness of a teacher candidate is the effectiveness of their mentor teacher. One thing that I'm wondering is we have, at least in clinical experience teaching, a really large challenge in getting enough quality mentor teachers. And so I guess the way that, at least for me, that I'm thinking about it is, how do we ensure with something like this, like that the mentor, whomever they might be, is of the most quality, while also honoring the flexibility. So I don't know, for me, I think for me at least, there would need to be like really tight structures around handoffs. If you're going to move a candidate from one classroom to another, ensuring that there are really tight handoffs. And I don't know how that would come through in rule.
Thanks, Christina and Calvin. That's helpful context for us to think about as we're going forward. Carrie, additional things you're thinking about?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, Jessica, were you suggesting, or is the conversation about creating and naming a different class of certificate for educators that go through this, or is that what I'm understanding?
That's a great question, Carrie. I've got a slide in just a few. I'm actually happy to click there if that helps contextualize.
Okay, I just want to make sure that,
yeah,
I think I heard you say, like, because asking sort of what would we call this? Because if I'm understanding correctly, and maybe I'll let you speak first, and then I'll raise my hand again. Okay.
So to clarify, we shared, I believe, with this group last go around and with the board that there were really two kind of possible implementation pathways for residencies. One being to create a new class of certificate, again with all of the wraparound considerations on basically mirroring our requirements for our teacher class of certificate across a number of different areas, but it would be a separate class. And then a separate opportunity was to have the residency pathway be a preparation route. And so in discussions with the AG's office and council, the recommended pathway forward for the SBEC that we were going to bring to them in April would be to pursue the residency pathway as a route. This would still yield a certificate with a different name than our regular teacher certificates, but it again would be a route versus a class, which has some benefits for us in terms of just common understandings of around different ways that teachers are prepared, and also in terms of streamlining the rulemaking associated. We'd be able to leverage the certification categories that fall under the teacher class of certificate. We would be able to clarify many of the certification exam requirements under the umbrella of this route as well. But that's the recommendation moving forward.
So, Jessica, so if it's a route, they would earn a standard certificate, but you're talking about the standard certificate noting something on there that they had completed a residency preparation.
So the hinkiness, Holly, is that because it doesn't take all the exams, it doesn't meet the full requirement of what we call a standard certificate, which is that you've completed all requirements. So it becomes its own type of classroom teacher certificate. So in the amendments that you see in April, you'll see us amending 232 to add in residency in addition to standard and all the like renewal provisions and stuff like that. It's clunky, but that's the best way we can find to do it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
And the messaging would be that this is not less than a standard certificate. It's a certificate with a unique specific name to signal the increased preparation of candidates who hold this certificate.
But we'll still be engaging in rulemaking, and it's still up for discussion whether or not this route will in fact not require certification exam.
Yes, absolutely. So we plan to present this as Laura shared as a discussion item with rule text at the April meeting, and then we'll continue to seek input from stakeholders, and that's actually on the bullet points of categories of input for us to discuss today too.
Okay, thanks.
But it's not that they won't take a certification exam. They will take the content pedagogy exam. They just won't take the separate pedagogy exam.
That's correct, Holly. So in the current draft components that we put to the SBEC,
included a requirement to pass the content pedagogy exam, but to not require them to take the pedagogy. In our stakeholder forums to date, we did receive positive input around these requirements. So we do anticipate maintaining this as the recommendation that's shared with the board in April, but would love to gather input on that as well.
So in this sort of stakeholder forum, I'll go ahead and express that that's not something that I feel like our members would support. And I know that there will be other opportunity to speak to that, but just to put it out there in this forum.
Carrie, can you share with me what your stakeholders might recommend instead?
Consistency with other
Okay.
routes.
Gotcha. So,
and I mean, just sort of the, this is sort of underscoring, the value inherent in quality preparation. And that's why we support the residency model and like to see the move to expand it. But, we also, to maintain sort of the professional standards of the profession, we disagree that certain pathways should result in different sort of testing expectations at the end.
Just put the details in the chat. Yeah.
that's super helpful context, Gary. Beth, I know that we've kind of jumped all over the deck here for a second. Wondered if it might make sense for us to park for a minute on readiness and continuous improvement and then maybe go back to supervision and coaching.
I agree.
Awesome.
So yes, same thing. If you review these components, along with some of the feedback we've already heard, and have anything else you'd like to add to this discussion, please speak up. We're taking notes or put it in the chat.
A wondering I had to potentially put out to this group. We heard feedback from stakeholders pretty consistently across our stakeholder groups that we met with earlier this week around these performance gates that have been articulated and the demonstration and mastery of prioritized competencies. There was a real call for these to be standardized to the extent possible while still acknowledging flexibility where applicable. Just wanted to get a sense from this group around thoughts on this concept of performance gates and the degree to which they could be standardized.
Well, I'll comment a little bit. This is Christina Sinclair at SFA, and maybe these are just questions, but to me, or I guess I'm wondering what this might look like. Is TEA planning on, or would rule end up having fundamental criteria that an EPP that would put together, say, their own form of a performance task and then submit it to TEA for use with residencies, and it would need to meet certain criteria?
It's a great question, Christina. I think the way that this has been currently articulated would be that programs would develop performance gates in alignment with the educator standards, and then they would kind of submit that as a component of their approval to offer this residency route. What some though named was, in this eye towards consistency, some stakeholders had raised, many EPPs use t-tests as sort of like a common evaluation tool. So was there an opportunity to think about some potential benchmarks or prioritized content within t-tests that we would say across all candidates, they would need to demonstrate proficiency on these things by the end of the residency? I think there was a lot of ideas that were floated, and so we're kind of seeking some additional input. There was even some consideration around, I know we talked about intensive pre-service just a little bit ago, and there was also feedback at the last SBEC meeting around potentially some of the way that we're measuring readiness and as a certification requirement in intensive pre-service could be something that we can mirror in the residency route as well. So, but if there's any other thoughts or ideas, we're certainly open to hearing them.
I noticed this piece around the host teacher recommending the teacher resident. I'm curious, like how, if there's an opportunity to either build in some criteria or rule or measure that like might limit bias, or I don't know, something that might pop up with the host teacher in particular having such a raised ability to impact someone earning this cert. Just curious how we might kind of mitigate what could happen, particularly with the host teacher. Either possibly like not holding a rigorous enough criteria, or possibly, you know, maybe a mismatch of personalities, et cetera. I mean, having worked with residencies before, we've seen it a couple times. So just curious how we might mitigate that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's something we definitely heard in the forums last week as well. And there was some talk around doing some kind of norming exercise between the host teacher and then the field site supervisor and the campus principal. But it's definitely something we're thinking about. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and I would just add that if I were submitting to try to be able to offer this route, and there was something as broad as submit 4 performance gates, I would be guessing a little bit. I mean, I'd do what I thought was quality, but there may have to be some further defining about what that is, so that people aren't getting frustrated with submitting and resubmitting and trying to guess at what you're looking for or what you're calling quality.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've heard the call in several of these sessions too about getting more consistency and clearly defining what the performance gates are, or what framework they're based upon. Any other input or feedback on the evaluation of readiness? I'd like to give us a chance to go back to the previous slide as well and hear your thoughts on that.
On the next slide for the governance portion, what do you imagine might be like the submission that kind of indicates that that's happened? And is the vision that like, we're down in Houston, so would like Aldine ISD meet with all 5 EPPs that have residencies in their district, and then would UHD meet with all 6 district? Like, is it happening at one time? Or just curious, one, what it could look like with kind of a complex system of lots of districts and lots of EPPs working, and 2, what would a submission to indicate that this happened at the kind of rigor you're hoping for look like?
Meredith, that's a great question. I think that as we named for y'all and for the board, a lot of these components have really been informed by the work that programs have been engaged in across the state who implement residency. So governance meetings have been a really consistent part of a lot of the work that residency programs have done. And so that's where what we've seen Texas programs implement is programmatic faculty and staff, district leaders and campus leaders and other field supervisors coming together and with kind of a shared agenda, sharing data on recent performance gates or other type of standardized measures of candidate progress, discussing problems of practice, to the extent to which districts and EPPs have been implementing some of the strategic staffing work, discussions around implementation of that as well. And so really being sort of this collaborative process. We have a number of pretty large preparation programs that implement these governance meetings and are able to navigate sort of the timelines with the ability to meet with their LEA partners. We have heard from a number of EPPs that it does mean that in some cases they need to have fewer EPP LEA partners than they may have had in the past, but it's been an effective structure. I think we would anticipate like evidence of this looking like completed meeting agendas with minutes included. I think would be a strong example of what a governance meeting kind of documentation would look like. Beth, anything else you would add there?
No, I think you pretty well covered it.
Awesome.
Do you want to go back to the previous slide then and talk about field site supervisors? So again, take a few minutes and just look over the components of field supervisors, resident coaching, and formal and informal observations. Go ahead, Dr. Sterling.
I just had a clarifying question to make sure that I'm not reading too intensely. So for the field supervisor, it says should have 3 years of experience in the class in which they're supervising. So let's say it's a math person and the cert is like 4.8 and they taught 3 years of 8th grade. The person they're certifying is in 6th grade. Are we talking that deep? Or like, how deep does that go is kind of my question.
So there's a need to clarify that statement as well, right? And I think that's something we've heard too, to be pretty clear about what kind of classroom experience counts towards that. So thank you so much for that one.
I think I will, if we stay with that same sentence at the end where it says evidence that they are an accomplished educator as shown by student learning, I think there might need to be some clarification about what would be acceptable evidence there. If we're talking about STAR scores or would be helpful to be real clear about what that is.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. And if you have suggestions along the lines of what would be acceptable, you know, we'd love to hear it, of course.
Not STAR scores? No, I don't know.
I will just jump in on this, on the student learning part, being very mindful that you would have to have pre of the exact same students and post in order to be able to say that teacher was like excelling in student learning. I think a lot of times what happens is we compare apples to oranges instead of apples to apples, and then it skews the data, as they might say. So just being mindful that if you're going to say that they were accomplished with student learning, they have to know where Christina started and where Christina ended, and not where Linda started and Christina ended.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat also about districts who use TIA using those designations for evaluation. Any other comments on any of the components here with the resident coaching? We've already received a good amount of feedback on the number of informal observations, as well as the duration, same with formal observations. So would love to hear your thoughts on any of that as well.
Do you anticipate, I'm curious, having not spent a ton of time getting to know field supervisors in my region, but is there already kind of an ecosystem of field supervisors that meet this criteria, or do we anticipate this maybe being like requiring EPPs to kind of add some more staff members that they don't already have? I'd just be curious to know if that's come up, or if that's like actually already in place and they might need 1 or 2 more folks.
Yeah,
That's a great question, Meredith Lee. I would say the requirements related to field supervisors are pretty close to our current requirements for field supervisors. So to clarify, when we say in the class in which supervision is being provided, that would be the class of certificate. So the teacher class of certificate, that's already a requirement for clinical teaching and internship. And then we do already have a provision in 228 that defines that the educator should be an accomplished educator. Maybe we haven't, to Dr. Sinclair's point, there's probably opportunity for further clarification there. But so thinking about that, there are many field supervisors that are EPPs leverage who already meet many of these requirements. But that's certainly something that we can, we got some feedback from our programs that implement residencies, that there's some considerations we might want to make around these field supervisor requirements to make sure that their folks can continue to qualify.
If there's no further comment on these, we can move on. But please, if you think of something that you wished that you'd said, please reach out to us. And we're taking stakeholder feedback continuously. So please do reach out.
Thanks, Beth. So did want to circle back to one, to just reinforce what Beth shared. We are going to hold multiple additional stakeholder forums as we move forward. We do plan on holding a session with LEAs who have participated in residency models over the course of the next few weeks, and seek their input as well in advance of the April meeting, and then are open to any additional feedback that folks have. Please feel free to reach out to Beth and myself to set up some additional time to discuss or share any additional draft language that you might have. Circling back to this discussion of route versus class, one thing that we did want to, well, two additional points I did want to name here. With the recommendation that this is pursued as a certification route versus class, we had discussed with you all in our last meeting and with the board in February that if we went down the pathway of this being a certification class, that we'd be required to establish an educator standards advisory committee. And so with now having the firm recommendation that this be pursued as a route, we will no longer be continuing with the Educator Standards Advisory Committee. That certainly does not mean, though, that we are not seeking advisement from stakeholders, again, leveraging a wide stretch of stakeholders to inform the policy moving forward here. One additional plug I would make, we'd like to be responsive as there's associated legislation that's been filed that has any implications for potential rules that we're discussing with the board. So did want to name for this group that House Bill 2358 was a bill that was filed recently that would establish what would be called a Texas Teacher Residency Partnership Program and an associated allotment. And it includes a provision that the SBEC establish requirements for qualified educator preparation programs to offer a residency educator certificate. So did want to name that the legislature is also thinking along these lines and has draft language out there as well. With that, did just want to stamp next steps. Again, just continuing to reinforce, we're compiling feedback, and our aim is to compile feedback and share it back out to both the residency forum participants that we engaged with recently and members of the EPSG. We are going to build in additional opportunities for feedback, including feedback with LEA partners, knowing that they've got a critical role to play in implementation of strong residency models. And then we, again, are going to bring a residency item to the board in April for discussion, reflective of feedback and inclusive of draft rule text And again, reinforcing Laura's point that this would be draft rule text that would be included in chapter 228 and other chapters, but we'll have the discussion in the context of the residency item with the goal of merging the 228 content at proposal in July. Any additional questions or discussion related to residencies at this point before we move on? All right, thank you. I really appreciate the discussion and the input. It's incredibly valuable to us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ebony for a quick update on EPPs and the reading academies.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. Y'all get me again. So we had the opportunity to have an EPP Reading Academies webinar that happened on Monday. And so I just wanted to provide y'all with a little bit of insight about the working groups that we are proposing. This is the opportunity for EPPs to act as authorized providers for reading academies. The hope of the working group is really to be able to have an EPP that is able to enroll one or more group of students to walk through the modules that are baked as is right now for reading academies, be able to attend some trainings and support sessions that will be hosted by the TEA Reading Academies team, and then really be able to provide some feedback on how well reading academies worked, as well as give some input on what changes may need to occur in order to make this a feasible pathway if EPPs voluntarily choose to opt in to being authorized providers in the future. And Jessica, do you mind hitting the next slide? In just a second, I will drop a link in the chat if you're interested in watching the webinar and or have interest or know EPPs that are interested in potentially participating in this working group. Again, we're just using this data the feedback in order to best support EPPs if they are making that choice in the 2024-2025 school year or potentially beyond to participate as an authorized providers for reading academies. So, I'll go ahead and pause here and see if there's any quick questions regarding reading academies.
Ebony, this is Holly. I watched the webinar and I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this because it is a reading academy question per se, but I noticed that I forget the woman who was presenting at the time from TEA. She talked about that there'd been significant feedback from the field about the difficulties associated with the blended model as opposed to the comprehensive model, and that the comprehensive model would be the prioritized model going forward. And so I wanted to learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Holly, that's a great question. We would definitely defer to their team, but we're happy to do an email introduction between you and Donna Lund and one of that work. Happy to do that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, I will drop those links in the chat. Thank you.
All right, well, I appreciate it. Turn over to DeMarco.
Thank you. My turn. Good morning, everyone. And I'm excited to bring you a brief update regarding the bilingual special education educator standards. Next slide, Jess. So y'all, during the February meeting, we had an opportunity to discuss with the SBEC the new bilingual special education educator standards, which, as a reminder, are an outcome of HB 2256, which requires the SBEC to implement a new bilingual special education certification pathway. Pending SBEC approval, SBEC and SBOE approval, these standards will go into effect fall of 2023. So that means we are bringing these for proposal during the April meeting. Following these standards going into effect, we are planning to engage with programs to discuss these new standards and ideas for updating program curriculum to meet the requirements of that certificate once SBEC has an opportunity to discuss what those requirements are. Which does lead us into this row here, summer 2025. So following the adoption of these standards, there are additional opportunities for us to engage SBEC in discussions related to the certification pathway or requirements for that pathway, in addition to personnel assignments. In fall 2025, this is when we anticipate the finalizing of the exam framework, additional capacity building opportunities for programs to discuss that framework and program curriculum, but also fall 25, we anticipate being the beginning date to begin accepting applications for this new cert area. And then in fall 2027 is when we anticipate this exam to launch and the certificate to be available. Next slide, Jess. Excuse me. And just to stamp again, y'all, after standards adoption, we will begin the process to design the bilingual special education exam, which are in alignment with those standards, but also bring the SBAC additional opportunities to really discuss what those requirements for this certificate will be, in addition to what this personnel assignment will look like. I think at the meeting, we saw that there's interest from the board in really defining the certificate and being mindful of the needs of the field. And we also saw that from some of our stakeholders who share public testimony as well. So that's the update from me. And with that, if there are no questions, I will pass it over to Jessica.
Awesome. Thanks, Marco. Were there any questions on this one? All righty. Well, Gail, we've made good work through this agenda. I'm like, I'm impressed that it's not even 11:30 and we're on our last topic. But it is a teacher performance assessment discussion. So, that's probably my famous last words, but did want to just lean into a discussion of the board's discussion around teacher performance assessment and pedagogy exam requirements at the February meeting. And then Holly, I know that you specifically had a question related to stakeholder engagement as it relates to TPA procurement. So I also want to have an opportunity to address that as well. And just to stamp for this group, the outcome of the SBAC's discussion in February. Again, as a reminder, we've been really working systematically with the board since July to work through a number of policy questions related to teacher performance assessments and pedagogy exam requirements. And so I had an opportunity to put a few of those decision points in front of the SBAC for confirmation as we move forward into our next meeting. And so the first point of discussion had been around the proposed pedagogy certification exam options. This really stemming from a discussion of the SBACs around, are there potential groups that we might need to carve out from the broader requirement of a transition to a teacher performance assessment certification exam, which the board had provided previous direction for us to pursue. So based upon that feedback, we will bring forward rule text that continues to be reflective of a carve out for teacher candidates who are pursuing certification in CTE fields being required to take the PPR for trade and industrial education rather than a teacher performance assessment. Secondarily, we had a discussion with the SBAC in February related to the implementation timeline for the teacher performance assessment requirement. And this really stemmed from stakeholder feedback around the original draft timeline that had been discussed with the SBAC that had an original requirement of the EdTPA being implemented in the 24-25 academic year, with additional teacher performance assessment options being available in 26-27 onward. Based upon the SBAC's discussion in February and their directives coming out of that discussion, staff does plan to bring forward draft rule text that reflects a 26-27 transition to teacher performance assessments as the required pedagogy exams for educator candidates. So that transition will be reflected in updated rule text. So that is a pretty significant shift. So I want to make sure we have an opportunity to really draw bright lines around that for the upstream. And then finally, we know at the December SBAC meeting, we had an opportunity to really go deep with the SBAC around options as they relate specifically to teacher performance assessment certification exams. and specifically spent some good amount of time talking about the potential development of a text TPA, so a Texas-specific teacher performance assessment that would be developed for the TEA and the SBEC and would be administered as one of the certification exams. As well as separately, this concept of the SBEC basically implementing procurement processes that had sort of an open call to vendors, programs, and others in the field who may have alternative teacher performance assessments that they've already developed or maybe in the process of developing, and presenting those and going through an approval process with the SBEC to have those also available as certification exam options. I'll say that the TEA staff has really been working diligently in the background since that discussion with the SBEC in December to draft out a potential process next steps and timelines. And I would say that we're really treating each as a separate pathway. So the process regarding procurement, development, et cetera, of a text TPA is a separate process and timeline from also work that we're undergoing to think through procurement process steps, timelines, as it relates to potential protocols to vet and approve alternative TPAs. So TEA staff does plan to present kind of a high level overview of what we think those processes would look and sound like for both text TPA development and vetting of alternative TPAs. And Holly, exactly to your point, we want to intentionally leverage stakeholders throughout this process. So I will say that this is still early days, but you will definitely see evident within those early process docs that we'll share with the board, critical opportunities to pull together stakeholder groups, engage, and then really thinking about, depending upon the aspects, feedback in April, opportunities to even pull together working groups who provide additional input for us on these processes moving forward. So definitely working groups and stakeholders being active along each step in this process. But also happy to meet with folks once we share those initial processes with the board in April. Happy to meet with folks afterward, gather any additional input that you all have on those processes. Are there other stakeholders that we would also want to loop into this process? Again, open to any and all feedback there.
Thank you, Jessica. So you will present the board in April with a process plan, so to speak. Correct. That will identify specific places for where stakeholder input will be sought. Is that kind of
exactly? So we're going to
forward?
present some like key milestones and sort of our initial structures for how we would go about developing a text TPA or go about vetting alternative TPAs, and how would identify. Our plan is to identify those critical milestones, which would include key opportunities for stakeholder input.
Okay, and then based on that, there'll be an opportunity for folks to respond
exactly. Yes.
From the field.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Jessica, can you go back to the timeline
Yeah,
slide?
absolutely.
One comment that I'd want to make is that this is obviously taking a lot longer than anyone anticipated in trying to come up with where Texas is going with this. And I'm going to bring forward that there's getting to where there's numerous challenges for those of us who did opt in to giving a TPA a try. And one of those is this is taking so long that now the longer that PPR is used in the ACEP report, those of us that have only people who are kind of come out of the woodworks before we were doing Ed TPA are the only ones doing PPR in our program. And I will tell you that is not representative of, we put out 400 clinical teachers a year, and I only had 38 that took PPR this last time. And I'll tell this whole group, we didn't meet criteria for that. We fell below the required, and anyway, it's helping us reach accredited warned. And it's presenting challenges that I'm having to make some pretty big decisions about very quickly. The other piece related to this is those of us that did opt in, those the use of the additional EdTPA handbooks was we thought a green light on that. And so if in this meantime, those of us who are doing the other options could, I don't know, have some form of support around that would be so helpful.
Dr. Sinclair, I really appreciate you naming both those things. I think that's incredibly important feedback for staff and for us to be able to share with the SBEC as well. I know that Chair Streepy has consistently reinforced that, really values those programs who stepped forward and participated actively in the EdTPA pilot, and those who's chosen to continue to implement a teacher performance assessment, ensuring that we're providing supports in whatever ways possible. So a few things come to mind. Certainly, we will raise that concern related to ASAP with the SBEC and potentially discuss the considerations or future rulemaking. Absolutely. In addition, I would name, while the timelines that were discussed here, I know are many years out, we would anticipate the rulemaking, again, pending SBEC and SBOE action, happening on a much faster timeline. So we would anticipate, again, we're going to discussion with the SBEC in April. If we get clear guidance and direction from the SBEC, would anticipate bringing a proposal item to the board in July, which could have these rules effective before the end of the 2023 calendar year. If you recall that the flexibility related to handbook that you mentioned is included in the draft rule text that's being discussed, and so would be available as we move forward, thinking about the latter half of the 23-24 academic year and beyond. It would also provide a clear signal to all programs in the state that there would be that transition to a performance assessment requirement. And so, again, there would be ongoing discussions around additional supports for programs who choose to opt into teacher performance assessment pathways early.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely. Additional questions or input related to teacher performance assessment?
Jessica, can you just clarify the based on the discussion that just occurred? You have one of the charts you guys showed was next steps, TPA as a certification exam, and on the EdTPA category, EdTPA would be ready to implement upon rulemaking. So it's recommended to begin 24-25 to allow the runway for programs who haven't yet begun EdTPA implementation to learn about the exam. Can you clarify what that means? Is that relevant to what you're...
Are you referencing a slide from like a previous meeting? Or maybe something
I think you just showed it.
Oh.
Next steps, TPA certification exam.
Yep, Holly, you caught a place where I didn't fully update my slides. So thank you for naming that, because I want to make sure I catch that. This is where this is what I get for using the same slides over and over again and just tinkering with them on the margins. But no, so the timeline reflected here is the outcome of the February discussion. So it would be, we're moving beyond that 24-25 transition, and all of the exam requirements would begin 26-27.
So then, relevant to the conversation you just had, with addressing the issue that Christina brought up, how are you saying there's already language in the, well, can you repeat what you were saying about the how?
Yep. So one challenge that a number of programs who've been in the pilot surfaced was the desire to have more flexibility in the handbooks that candidates complete for certification, specifically in the like core subjects EC6 category. Right now in current rule, we only allow the elementary
education with a reading, elementary reading with task 4 math is the only handbook or exam that's allowed for core subjects EC6 certification. And a lot of programs named, well, if I have a candidate who's in a 5th grade setting where they are teaching just science, that's not necessarily the most aligned handbook. And so in the draft rule text that we've presented to the SBEC and all of our meetings as of late, and was also included in the draft rule text that was ultimately vetoed by the SBOE, we had options for TPA exams for a number of fields, in particular the core subjects EC6 fields and 4.8. Those, again, TPA will still be an option throughout all of these years until it would be a part of the TPA requirements in 26-27. And so to be responsive to the needs of folks who want to keep doing TPA during these intervening years, we've got that as like an update that we would still reflect in the rule.
Right, but what about the ASEP issue?
Yeah, so the ASEP issue is a separate one, and a feedback that's really appreciated. Feedback that we'll bring to the SBEC. We've got some, and then I think opportunities in future discussions as we talk about other components of rule to identify ways to potentially address that issue.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts or questions on this end?
Jessica?
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me? Just to clarify, hi, good morning. Just a clarifying question. So we're anticipating that maybe in July, we'll sort of know, right, where we are on this timeline, right? Am I understanding correctly?
Yep, Becky. So we will bring this back. We're bringing this to the board in April. Our goal is to get direction to from them if they want us to move forward with this as the timeline reflected in the draft rule text that they'll review. And so the intent would be if we seek their approval in April to bring this back as an item at proposal for their action in July. So that would give solid signal to the field around next steps.
Thank you.
All right, well, if there's no additional questions on this end, I think I'll turn it over, I believe, to Christy to talk FG meeting dates.
Thanks so much, Jessica. And I am not shocked, but so excited that you got so much meaningful feedback. I kept thinking there's no way we're going to get all this done in 2 hours. So congratulations to everybody. I always provide this at the end of the meeting, just as a reminder of when the FG meeting dates are coming. And so this is just a reminder for the group. But if you want to move to the next one and allow anyone to have any additional questions that staff has not had the opportunity to address for you, now would be the time. And we've got 16 minutes. That is a great pause. Well, you all have a great weekend and thank you for your input. And I know that you've given staff some great input and feedback that we will be taking to the SBEC as well as to some other working groups, as well as some of the items that we'll be drafting moving forward. So if there's nothing else, we'll kind of hang out here while y'all jump off. If there's any other particular questions that you have, we are here for you.
Team, I had a quick question. If we wanted to, I know we have like an early version of the effective educator preparation framework. I know it's gotten some different versions. If we like want to easily access the most up-to-date draft, where might we locate that?
That's a great question, Meredith Lee. There is a version of the EPF. I'm like navigating and talking, so I make sure I'm not speaking out of turn. I do believe we have the most up-to-date version posted to our website, but I will double check, confirm that for you. And then again, just reinforcing that we will have ideally an updated draft in the course of the next few weeks that we do anticipate sending back out to the EPSG. So you all have the most up-to-date draft to give any additional input on in advance of the April meeting. So look for that in the coming weeks as well. But I'm going to try and see if I can quickly navigate to the page and see if I can locate it for you.
Thank you so much. We just sometimes reference it in the Houston teacher prep community of practice. And I thought, oh, it'd be nice to easily locate the most up-to-date version. So thank you for sending that.
Absolutely. So it lives on, if you ever navigate to the preparation program provider resources page, it lives there in a link. And so I just put it in the chat for you. But again, look for that more updated version coming shortly.
Holly, I love that you had two pictures. You're here twice. You are double showing up and representing for us, as always. You're such a trooper.
Does it count?
Yes, you get yes, and
Double
you get double stars. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Great job.